Thank you, Meg. Thank you, PowerToFly. Thank you to our awesome guest speakers that I'm going to pass the mic to in just a moment. But I just want to say, hold on to your britches. This is going to be a fun ride. I've had the honor of interviewing Kryss several times on our Chat and Learn program here at PowerToFly. And I trust anyone she brings into the conversation. So I'm excited to learn more about Karen, who is our second guest speaker. So get your tea. I was about to run and get my hot water bottle to just cozy up and listen to them, just drop a lot of knowledge. But I just want to first start out by saying thank you everyone for joining. I know we've got a lot of live callers listening in. So I just want to be sure that you know that we would love to hear from you. So go ahead and write in the chat box whenever you feel called to do so. Any questions, reflections, dreams that you had last night, your voice needs to be heard, especially with this, very provocative and very relevant topic. The world is on fire, things are broken, we need to fix them. So, what better way to, start the movement by, or at least, continue to add fuel to the fire by having conversations like these. So, please drop in the chat box anything that you want to share. And I would just love to invite folks to support my project that is called the Positive Force Team. If you go to thepositiveforceteam.org and write in the name of this chat, which is, the name of the summit, which is Elevating Black Women, I'll give you some network goodies. So go to thepositiveforceteam.org. Let me know that you attended, and then you can look out for some flavorful things we've got in store. With that said, I'm going to pass the mic to our guest speakers. Let's start with Kryss. Kryss, take a few moments to introduce yourself and then let us know some fun facts to kick us off.
Sure. So, hi, everybody, and I am so thrilled to be here. Normally, I just get to hang out with Mariella, and it's the two of us, which I hate to use the word just because I could hang out with her 24/7 all the time, even though she won't share her hot water bottle. Apparently she can't pass it between countries. I don't know. But this time I get this super fun experience to hang out with Dr. Karen, who announced in her bio a brand new job. And I think, I'm not positive, but it might be the first time that that's been said about her.
Yes.
So exclusive scoop happening right here. When we start talking about becoming an ally in a space that we weren't born into, my work is all in the LGBT plus community, and I am not LGBT plus identified. And for me, the work began when I was a kid and I saw some of the staging of the musical Rent. And the character of Angel, I just felt instantly connected to. And I was sort of this like gawky teenager, preteen person who had no clue who I was. And I wanted to know who I was. And here was this character that was just so clear in who she was. And she happened to be trans identified. And I thought about, would she be my friend? Would I be her friend if she came to my school? And I was at the age where my school was my whole world. And I didn't know. And I couldn't sleep at night with that. I couldn't deal with the fact that something that made her different, that would get her made fun of at my school, might have meant I would have missed out on this amazing person. And it led me down this sort of rabbit hole of, why do I think this way? And how do I rectify in myself how I feel about this? And what do I know? And what do I learn? And I grew up in small town Ohio, where as far as we knew, nobody was LGBT plus identified, which is statistically impossible, but it means that people were just not out. And it led down this long rabbit hole of education, and that led to volunteering, which led to activism and this whole life path of things. And as it turns out, when the Rent tour was going around many, many moons ago, I traveled sometimes. I had some friends in the cast, and I traveled sometimes to go see shows. And one of the cities that I went to go see shows was in Washington, D.C. And I got there early to try and get some cheap tickets, and was standing around to get there early, super introverted and feeling really awkward because everybody was there with friends. And I was feeling like that weirdo by myself. And this super, super outgoing redhead happened to walk up next to me, and we struck up a conversation. And that was many moons and lifetimes and boyfriends and breakups and degrees ago. And that redheaded outgoing, I don't know how she got my brand of crazy, because we have the same brand of crazy, happens to be Dr. Karen Uslin. So that's how I got here, how she got to this room with us. How'd you come into your activism work, Karen?
So I would say probably on some level, the activism aspect of what I do came later, but was shaped by growing up and, history and that kind of thing. So my area of expertise is actually in performing arts and the Holocaust and performing arts and genocide. I grew up in Philadelphia. So I grew up in a major city. I grew up in a diverse city. The area of Philadelphia I grew up in was pretty much 50-50, predominantly Roman Catholic and Jewish. I was raised Roman Catholic, but Jewish culture, Jewish history was very much a part of just part of my everyday life, because that was the neighborhood of Philly that I grew up in. So when I started, going to school, my senior year of high school, actually, I was very much a product of the Catholic school system of Philly, private Catholic, all girls, school. My senior year, I got asked to go sing at the Vatican for the beatification of 11 sisters who were killed by the Nazis in World War II. When I got to college, I ended up doing a project on composers, Jewish composers during Nazi Europe. So that sort of music and Holocaust connection was kind of there from my earlier days. But the thing is, when you get involved with something like music and the Holocaust, or you get involved with something like Holocaust, genocide studies, et cetera, you start ending up getting pulled in different directions, and not pulled in a bad way, but you just sort of fall into different things. So I was raised Roman Catholic, and I was doing something that was predominantly in the Jewish studies world. So that automatically meant I started getting asked about Jewish Catholic relations kind of things. As hate crimes and anti-Semitism in this country has gone up over the last 4 to 5 years, especially when you have an area of expertise like what I do, you just automatically start getting asked your opinions or about different aspects of that. So the activism part of what I do has kind of picked up over the last, I would say, 6 to 7 years, just by virtue of the academic work that I've studied, but also because what I do is very interdisciplinary. So my PhD is in musicology, but I'm not a straight musicologist. I do history, I do psychology, I do sociology, anthropology. You're doing a little bit of everything. And when you're in that space of doing a little bit of everything, the activism part of it just kind of inherently grows out of that. I mean, I got a PhD from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and I focused on Jewish history and Jewish studies while not having a family background in Judaism at all. So
I love that we came into it. I never realized till now that we came into it really opposite, that your academic work brought you to activism. And I hadn't planned to have what I always call the alphabet soup of degrees and licenses that come after my name. I hadn't planned for any of that. The activism led me to each of those.
Yeah.
I can't do the next thing without this degree. So, okay, I'll go back to school and get this degree. With the exception of the doctorate that I'm working on now, half of it was I need it for the degree. The other half was that I had I sarcastically say, misfortune of coming through after knowing someone who used to previously be Karen Uslin, who I knew through her process of becoming Dr. Karen Uslin. And somehow the next thing I knew, she was saying like, oh yeah, you should do this. And now I'm working on a dissertation and questioning why I listen to her about things, while also texting her to ask her questions that I will still listen to. But there is something I think about, sometimes it is the academic work that happens first, and sometimes it's the heart and spirit that come in that lead to the academic work. And I think there's a lot for, I guess, to call them potential allies, that can get really hesitant in that space of, how can I be an ally if I don't know enough? And then the more you try and learn, the more you realize you can never know enough. And that's not any one person, that's just the reality of the way life works. And as somebody in a space of allyship and activism, in a life experience I don't have, because I'm not identified within this population, I will extra level never know enough, because I will never be able to speak to the experience of being gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, agender, any of the gray sexual, all those things that are encompassed by that plus sign at the end of LGBT is something I can never know. And as we keep watching what's happening in the news, and we're seeing the way that for the first time in a long time, there are Nazi marches again, and people with Nazi flags on their houses, where they're not just secret Nazis on the internet, they're real open about it. And we're seeing all of these bills, they're coming up, not just about transgender people in public bathrooms, but what's happening, for example, in Arkansas, where laws are passing now that the state is saying, for those who haven't caught it yet, it happened yesterday that it got approved that now in the state of Arkansas, trans kids cannot get the mental health or medical health that they need, that their doctor or their social worker or their psychologist says that they need. The law no longer allows it for children who are trans identified. So there's now a government law that supersedes what actual medical and mental health professionals know and use as best practice based on knowing that person and the research anymore. There are more of these coming up in more states. There's more of these debates. We're seeing them about participation in sports. Certainly we can go down deep rabbit holes. If I got to keep y'all all day, and if Karen was much more of an introvert, I could just take over and go down that rabbit hole with everybody. I know we don't get to do that. As we did say also, if you have thoughts that we don't get to in the chat, but please keep chatting, or you have questions, or you have things you want to talk about that you don't want to talk about publicly, there is contact info for any and all of the three of us available. Also, Google exists. So if you lose it and you think of us later, you can come back to PowerToFly's website, look for our names, Google us, find our email, send us emails. We will have conversations about any of our topics. It may be tough to shut us up a little bit, but we are here for those conversations. So what else are you thinking about, Mariella? What do we have you thinking on today?
I mean, wow, so fascinating well, first of all, I love that there's a common thread of art that guided you all into this line of work. So I'm also a performance artist, theater and film, raised me. And actually my nickname is Mimi. So hello, Rend.
That's a whole moment. You and I will have some chats.
Yes. But you know what? So Kryss, I recently was able to read this post, very, very thoughtful post on 5 things you need to know to be a highly effective educator. And I would just for the sake of this conversation, also exchange that word for ally for the purpose of this conversation. I'm just going to highlight the 5 tips that you wrote here in this article. And I would love for both of you to just take the mic and run with it, because it's touching on a lot of the things that you all mentioned in your introduction, just, fun facts about yourself and how you all came into this line of work. So, and I definitely recommend folks, I'm going to drop in the link so that you all can take some time to go in depth and read this beautiful interview that Kryss has. But basically 5 things you need to know to be a highly effective educator, and for the purpose of this conversation, ally. So 1, according to Kryss, get educated and keep getting educated. 2, shut up. 3, make a payment. 4, use your privilege. And 5, stop assuming. So I'll pass the mic back to you all, because I'm interested to see how you all can kind of crack this open.
Yeah. So for sake of a little bit of expounding on that, sort of the shut up piece of it, which I suppose probably isn't something most people would say in a public interview. So this is what happens when people let me talk uninterrupted.
Yeah, be willing to listen.
Right. Yeah, is that you have to be willing to, I think so often we want to help, we want to do. And actually there was just an episode of New Amsterdam, a TV show that's a medical drama that was on, gosh, I believe it was last night. So it would have been April 6th episode, about a white man in charge who wanted to end systemic racism at his hospital. And he ran around and came up with all of these ideas. And the problem he was running into was that he was doing all the talking and he didn't mean any harm. His heart was in the right place. He meant well, but he was missing that a big part of the problem is that when you don't listen to somebody else's story and experience, you're missing everything that you're supposed to be learning. So the shut up piece of it isn't just sort of an in general rude shut up. There are people who know more than you know. no matter who you are, no matter how much you know.
Yeah.
I've been doing this 25 something years. I've now written 2 books about it. There will always be times where I always say the dumbest person in the room on this topic, not necessarily because I'm uneducated or because people don't want me there, but because they have stories and experiences to share. And so sometimes it's the humble aspect of, I'm going to come into a room and I don't need you to all know how smart I am. I don't need to tell you my degrees or how many books I've written or what I've done. I just need to hear the things that you're willing to share and be really, really grateful. I think we miss that a lot, that when somebody is willing to share their story, especially when it's rooted in trauma,
Yeah.
I always think of it as essentially somebody's got a scab that's healing and they say to you, I'm willing to pick open my scab and bleed again so that you get the benefit of my blood. So not just being willing to hear it, but also being so grateful that someone is gifting you with that.
Yeah. Well, I would say too, with the education component, I think is tricky for a lot of people because you get in this headspace of you may not necessarily know where to look, but then you're afraid to ask questions to people as well. And Kryss and I have actually talked about this, this idea that it's not incumbent on other people to teach you. And I actually, and I will say I did push back on her a little bit with that aspect. Now, granted, part of this is I am an extreme introvert. I will talk your ear off and I have no issues.
She's an extreme extrovert.
And extreme extrovert.
If you've ever been to somebody's house and they have a golden retriever that like never leaves you alone and wants to socialize all the time, that golden retriever is less extroverted than Dr. Karen Uslin in the best possible way.
So I have no issues going up to people and talking to people and all of that. And I, part of it is a lot of times people will say, well, Google exists, the internet exists, you can look stuff up. But I still, even for things that I can look up and that I know are easy access, I always prefer hearing that stuff from a physical person versus looking it up on the internet, even versus sometimes reading it in a book, because you don't necessarily know you don't necessarily have verification where stuff on the internet is coming from. And books, sometimes, it's great to know what is out there. I'm not telling people don't read books. Please go read all the books you can get your hands on. But understand too that every author is coming from things from a certain point of view. And so you need the real life experiences of people who have lived things in order to complement what you can find on the internet and what you can read. And so for me, I actually feel I learn more by by not forcing myself into places that aren't willing to let me in. I should say that I think both Kryss and I would say for what we do, we never want to put people in an uncomfortable position to do something that they don't want to do. And especially with genocide survivors, with Holocaust survivors, some of them are willing to talk about every blessed detail that they can remember, that they know. Others, it's just too traumatic for them to go there. And you have to respect people where they are. So if somebody's not willing to talk, you have to respect that. But you also have to take advantage and go seek people who are willing to talk, because there are things that the internet and books can give you a foundation for sort of terminology, but the lived experience is going to be gotten from physically speaking to people. And
but also, and I say this also as somebody who's written 2 books, also kind of shut up. Just kidding. I mean, mostly, whatever.
Go read Kryss's books first off.
She's in the acknowledgements of both of my books, so I say that with all of the love, and there's that.
Yeah, and
but I think when I say that, I say it though in that often what happens is that, for example, in Black History Month, somehow in every school everywhere, the one Black kid in the class is asked their opinion of everything. And, the one gay kid in a class is asked everything, but only in the month of June. not everybody who identifies as some way is an expert in something. They're an expert in themselves.
I would say, yeah, first off, not everybody is an expert. And, it seems anathema to, I think, people like Kryss or Mariella or me or all of you who are watching this right now, but not everybody wants to go publicly down that activism road and be sort of upfront about everything, about their opinions and stuff. So I think it's more, you come into it and when you're approaching people and when you're trying to learn information and educate yourself, you have to first off, I would encourage, have an idea of questions in your head, what are things that you want to know, but also you have to accept people where they are and accept them for whatever space they are in and wherever they are on their journey, because it's all a journey, for as long as I've been, and I'll be 39 in June. I've been doing this since I was maybe 17, 18. So even for 20 some years of experience, there are always things I don't know. I'm always asking, my local rabbi down here, I'm always asking my friends who grew up with Jewish families, the Holocaust survivors that I've been blessed enough to have them welcome me into their families. I'm always asking, but I'm also respecting if people don't want to talk about something. So you have to just sort of find that balance and don't take it personally if somebody doesn't want to talk about something. It's not you, it's that this is how they're moving on with their lives and how they deal with their trauma or their life experience. And there's no right or wrong with that.
Sure. I mean, and it is also, we now, because of the internet, there are people who are intentionally putting themselves out to share their experience.
Yeah.
I have a wonderful friend who's an author, Fred Joseph, wrote a book about how to be a better friend to Black people for non-Black people.
Yeah.
And he's put himself out there as an educator. I've put myself out there as an educator. Karen has put herself out there as an educator. So we've said to the world around us, if you have questions about the topic that I know about, please ask me. That's a very different sort of thing. If you have a question about what it means to be transgender or that experience or whatever, I've put myself out there as someone you can come ask. Not only can you, I encourage it, please do.
Yeah.
Find me on social media, find me on the website, all these things. I got books, come ask me.
Yeah.
That's a very different thing than you happen to meet a person who is transgender identified and you suddenly assume their job
that they're going to tell you their life story.
Sure. And that ties into one of the other points in the article about paying people. And often we come into this space of, well, if you're Black, you want people to not be racist. So now you're obligated, because you're the Black person in the room, to tell us all the things about everything Black. And if you don't, then you must just want us to stay racist. So if we're racist now, it's your fault, not ours. And that's all garbage, first of all. Yeah. And it also means,
I was going to say, taking off of that
for their work.
Well, yes, you do. But also groups of people are not monoliths. All Black people do not have the same experience. All Jewish people do not have the same experience. All Holocaust survivors do not have the same experience. People are individuals, and even for, let's say, an experience like the Holocaust, every single Holocaust survivor or every single family, every single person touched by that tragedy has a different experience. Even two survivors who both experienced hunger in the camp are going to describe it different ways. It's going to affect them different ways. They're going to look at it in different ways. You can't group everybody into one box. Everybody is an individual, and they all have a massive amount that's coming into how they view their story, how they view their situation, how they view the context, which first off is, for me, means you should talk to as many people as you can. Don't tunnel vision yourself into one lane, but also respect the fact that everybody is different. You can't put people in the same box and expect that everybody from one group is going to act the same way, think the same thing, do the same thing. Humanity does not work like that.
Absolutely.
I know
it also ties
humanity does
into
not.
when we're looking as an ally at
Yeah.
how do we work as allies or activists within looking at, for example, our own family that might not inherently be inclusive, is that there isn't one. It would be really nice if it was like, here's the blueprint, follow these steps, and suddenly your family is no longer, anti-Semitic
Yeah,
or
it
racist
doesn't
or
work that way.
It'd be fantastic. But just the way that people in a marginalized community group aren't a monolith, neither are the people with privilege. And
Right.
so sometimes it takes different paths to finding out. I have some family members who don't understand what I do. They don't know about this topic area.
Yeah.
The man who raised me probably thinks that I'm just a bleeding heart liberal hippie, whatever. I mean, probably the tie-dye and the bare feet thing make him not completely wrong. But he wasn't willing to have a lot of conversations until I happened to write a book, and now he'll read it because I wrote it. And the conversations we may have might get tricky. But I know that when I come to him, he's a person who understands the need to support children who were traumatized. So my take with him might be to look at what is the experience of a trans kid who has, maybe it's laws, or maybe they're thrown out of their home because they're not accepted. That's a different path than somebody who's trying to figure out why it matters that we allow name changes at a business, where that one, instead of saying you have one trans person in your company, you need to be inclusive, where they just think, well, that's a waste of time for one person.
Yeah.
I can talk about, if there are people here named William, but they go by Bill, it would be great if their email address matched the name they use. And there's a lot of people who don't use their first name, legal first name, as the name they go by. They can see themselves and how that benefits. And the side benefit is that it also works for trans people, but I need to frame it in ways that are specific to them. And we do that initially in learning. Part of the way our brain learns is that we associate any situation first to us. So when the Me Too movement was first happening, it's why we saw a lot of men that would talk about these women could be, the woman who's saying Me Too might have been my mom or my sister or my wife or my daughter.
Right.
The first way they could connect to it was to envision, what if this was happening to somebody I love? And then the next step is, can we and how do we value these people as individual whole people who don't have to have any association with us to be valid and valuable and matter? And it gets different when it's, the populations that I work with are, for the most part, alive currently. And we're watching these bills and these laws happen. We're seeing the faces of trans kids who are speaking up. Is a very different sort of thing than the idea to us of the Holocaust, which is this thing that some people might deny or they've only seen in history books, and we don't have so many of the survivors.
Yeah, I mean, we are going, God willing, that Kryss and Mariella and I live into our 80s or 90s, we will be alive to see the last living Holocaust survivors pass away. So, with Holocaust and genocide studies, there's a little bit of a time crunch too, because you're trying to make sure that you get these people's stories in order that they are preserved, because we're getting towards the end of their time here with us. But I actually want to go off a little bit on something, Kryss, that you said a few minutes ago about on some level, like the spaces that you go into as an ally. I'm paraphrasing a bit there, but I think that's sort of where you were going with that. And I think the one thing also to realize is that, as an ally, and especially when you're first starting off, I mean, one of the things that I remember was when I decided that this was the area I was going to go into, it's really scary, because I know for me, you're sort of afraid to go into those spaces because you're afraid of, you don't want to hurt anybody. You don't want to say something wrong. You don't want to, mess something, you have fear going into it. And I think that's something that, we all you have to accept that fear is going to be a little bit of part of that. But I think also go into it understanding that, people, at least I've been lucky enough that most people I've approached, they understand you're coming at things with good intentions and understand you're going to make mistakes. But no, I've very rarely had people flip out at me or yell or get upset over mistakes. They look at it as a learning opportunity. I remember actually when I was a graduate student, when I was in my PhD program at Catholic, but Catholic University has, with their PhD programs, you have a major area and a minor area. So my major area was musicology. My minor area was Central and Eastern European studies with sort of a focus on Jewish studies. And so for that minor area, I had to take classes in the history department. And the one semester, the history department at Catholic didn't have any courses that would fit in with my area. They were big on Irish history that semester, which was not going to help me with what I was doing. Interesting as it is, I have some Irish in my background, so not that I wasn't interested,
the
but
red
it wasn't.
hair gave you away.
This is actually Slovakian, not Irish. So
also, she would know because in addition to being the Holocaust friend, which is a weird way to refer to someone unless you know Karen.
That's okay.
She's also a genealogist. So she also knows more about my own family background than I do. But I want to make sure we finish this before I know Mariella's got more questions for us.
Yeah. So what I did was I took a course at the University of Maryland, because in DC, all the universities are in a consortium. So if you're a student at one, you can take classes, Catholic, UMD, Howard, Georgetown, George Mason, George Washington, all of that. And I was the first student to take a Jewish intro to Jewish studies class for master's students as a consortium student. And let me tell you, the first class, that what UMD did was the class was set up so that every week we had a different professor from the Jewish Studies department who would come in and do a little thing with their area of expertise. The very first class, the professor wanted us to have all of us, there were 4 of us in the class, to go over her apartment for a kosher dinner to talk about Yiddish literature, which was our first thing. I had never been to a kosher dinner. I had no clue about Yiddish literature. I do not speak Yiddish. And I was going into a space where the other students there were students who had grown up mostly in conservative Jewish households, and they were doing, master's and PhD work in Jewish studies. And here I am, a student from Catholic University, coming into the space. I was terrified. And it was absolutely fine. I mean, it made me, it was interesting because the conversations that grew out of it were then, as we were reading things through the semester, they would ask, well, how did you learn about this in Catholic school when you were a kid? It was a point of comparison that then we ended up having really great conversations that came out of it. And even since then, I always still get nervous, even talking to Holocaust survivors, genocide, survivors, that kind of thing. Fear is part of what being an ally is, because you're coming into a subject area that you personally may not have the background or have, grown up with, etc. But if you come at it with respect, people will see that and they're going to be willing to allow you into their space. They're going to want to help you navigate that space. And then you're going to start to grow and learn and be able to build that foundation to be a good ally.
Absolutely.
So I think navigating space is
Black
important.
people didn't create racism. Jewish
Right.
people didn't create anti-Semitism. LGBT plus people didn't invent or create homophobia or transphobia or biphobia.
Yes.
So, I'm with the collective here that it shouldn't then be up to the people who are being harmed by it to find a way to fix it from a position of being marginalized already. Mariella, what's going on in our chat? Catch us up.
Yes. So I just want to.
I haven't. Yeah.
To both of you. Thank you for going on that riff. I know that I threw out a lot of things to talk about. I'm going to highlight some questions that folks are writing in the chat, but I do want to hold you all on just some important things that you all were speaking about regarding storytelling. And I just want to bring us to, the current day of age where, you all are referencing the internet, you're referencing, learning about people's stories, either from asking them personally about their narratives or picking up books. And as we all historically know, as we all know, historically speaking, there is the A side of history and there's the B side of history, right? There's the story that the winners wrote. And so normally that's not inclusive. And I've done a lot of research and had a lot of conversations with women and non-binary folks about how same thing is kind of happening. I shouldn't say kind of, the same thing is absolutely happening in the digital space. And I interviewed a woman from Kenya the other day. She was speaking about, the topic was, is artificial intelligence discriminatory? Short answer, yes, it is. And I encourage everyone to watch the chat. And why is it like that? It's because, these technological spaces are not being inclusive to share stories and share voices. So you have, the colonization of the digital space that are essentially leaving voices out of the picture. Right. So I just wanted to, because the 5 tips that that's in this article, it should be in the chat box for our live callers. So I definitely encourage you all to take a look at that. But just to move forward with making a payment, you all were speaking about making a payment and privilege. So I would love to have your response to this article that I read recently, and I'm just going to read it here. And I'd just love for you all to take the mic back and just rant on it a little bit. So this is kind of has to do with making a payment and, using your privilege to basically help with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this comes from Urban Geeks, making tech more colorful, accessible, and diverse. And I quote, "The overwhelming majority of VCs continue to invest in younger versions of themselves. In fact, most venture-backed startups are overwhelmingly white, male, Ivy League educated, and based in Silicon Valley, according to a recent study conducted jointly by Diversity VC and Rate My Investor. Yet Black women and Latinx women are the fastest growing sector of entrepreneurs, and they are starting businesses that ultimately contribute jobs and dollars to the overall economy. Despite this impressive feat, they are still not viewed as viable investments. So how do we solve this problem?" This was written in the article. So I would love for you to give tips for, folks who want to make a payment, want to really make space at the table to really diversify, the technological realm that we are, entering into, and, it is advancing at, crazy speeds. How can we essentially make more space for more stories to be told so that we have, a more holistic, humanistic experience in the technological space and in the physical world?
Well, one thing I would definitely recommend for those of you who are active on Twitter has been an amazing digital space for women and minority historians, for business people, science people, etc. I've been able to meet a lot of from around the world, from Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, etc. I've been able to meet a lot of amazing women who are really at the forefront of their fields and are really pushing amazing ideas for ways to open these spaces up. And by supporting these women, through their social media platforms, et cetera, a lot of times they're also then connecting you to other people. I have for any of you who want a really good history podcast to listen to, my friend Alina Nowielska, who is in Poland, her and her friend Alexandra Churchill run this amazing podcast called History Hack. And there's a YouTube channel and it's on Patreon, and they've had over 1 million hits on the podcast, and they just started it during, March 2020. So it's only about a year old. This was a pandemic lockdown project that the two of them went on. That's also an incredible space for women in all aspects of history, technological history, ancient history, etc. And they're constantly putting up, links to other women on social media and what they're doing. So it's sort of this amazing burst and network of growth that's allowing people to access places, to access digital content by women, businesses by women, science projects by women, et cetera, that maybe you would not have known of before. So I will say personally that a lot of times social media is where I'm ending up connecting and being able to promote women in these other spaces that maybe I didn't know about them before, hadn't heard about them before. So I think that's that's a really big one. And this is one thing I will say, Google can be your friend here. Google women in science, Google women businesses, Google, Google, where I guess maybe it was over the summer. Time is starting to sort of all like lump together in one conglomerate.
But March 2020 was a million years ago, and
yes.
Also the 90s was within the past decade. So yeah, there's no logic in it.
But Kryss, I think you might have actually been the one to post it, to one of the first people to post it up that I saw, and it was sort of like putting a website up of Black women-owned businesses that people could order different goods and different things from. And so then, I was able to put that out to my social media followers and, promote. I think on some level, I think, Marielle, you mentioned about sort of the paying. And yes, there is the aspect of, paying women what they deserve, what is equal to their counterparts and all of that. But payment, I think, also can be different forms. Payment is, using your time and your effort and your talents to promote those around, to promote the women around you, promote the women that, maybe are not getting as much on that end, using the gifts that you have to promote people who are doing amazing things.
Yeah.
And that to me is always a form of payment too.
Yeah. It ties also into privilege. Some of it is the privilege we have with our money. Some of it is the privilege we have with our social media following. Or if we're somebody who has the boss's ear, that we've got a privilege in being able to share some information. And one of the things I think that the pandemic also helped to highlight was taking a look at what can we be doing? How can we be supportive when we're not in the same situations we were used to being in? And really taking a look too at, we in America have this concept of like, we refer to Black people as the minority group, but the reality of it is Black people are the global majority. So even the way we use our language, we're framing it consistently in American English as, marginalized people. Is it financially true? Yes. Are these people being paid worse, treated worse, all these things? Yes. But when a group of people is referred to as some version of lesser than, it's no wonder then that some of us will always see them as lesser than. When we have our textbooks that only ever show old white men who did awesome things, not only is it no wonder that anyone who's not a white man doesn't think they can do awesome things, but it means everybody also thinks anyone else who's not a white boy in a class doesn't have the potential to do awesome things. So it's really looking at those sorts of areas. It's looking at, what can I find if someone else is to promote? Where can I find, for example, I mentioned Fred Joseph. He happens to be a Black man and who's writing. And so every time that I'm interviewing, one of the things that I am very intentional about is mentioning him and mentioning his book and sending people in my space, whatever platform I have, in his direction. And it's happened to be that there are times when he's done interviews as a man with other men, that when he talks about books and things, he will sometimes, lucky for me, mention me and what I'm doing, because he sees his platform as an opportunity to talk about what a woman is doing. And I think when we keep trading those, when we are not just looking for, I want to buy a pair of sweatpants, and we're not just going to Amazon, but maybe we're intentionally looking for Black-owned businesses that we can buy a pair of sweatpants for. And maybe it is a position of privilege to be able to pay $5 or $10 more from that small Black-owned or gay-owned business than whatever the cheap stuff is on Amazon. There is privilege in that, sure. But if you're in the position and you have that privilege to do it, it's not just paying people in dollars, it's paying them in your business. It's also looking at the opposite of that. When you have, for example, like Chick-fil-A, who's been really openly discriminatory against LGBT plus people, that even when they've come out and said they're not, we see the history of them donating to candidates and to pass bills into law that are harmful, to not spending your money there. And when you're not spending your money there and you'd still like a chicken sandwich, find a Black-owned business that sells chicken sandwiches in your community. And when you're going to places in your community and you're seeing that somebody's working really hard, or you're back when things are open again, maybe you're going to local craft fairs or flea markets and you're seeing what people are building and creating, use your social media to promote that. Give your gifts. If you're a gift giver, choose and be intentional that you're giving of gifts from places and people who are in what we, often refer to as marginalized communities. Get the business cards when you're giving something. When you wear something and you're posting pictures of, felt cute, might delete later things, tag the business in it. Hashtag whatever, include the businesses. Use every level of ability that you have, every platform that you have, which can happen from your home.
And
I know we're going to run out of time. We're down to 10.
I know.
Karen,
It's going so fast. This is
I know it always does.
We need more time, but
we need more time.
But I was
for sure.
but I was going to say, I think a lot of times the emphasis does get put on physical money and the monetary end of things, and on some level, rightfully so, and I understand that. But to be an ally, there are a million things you can do besides the monetary end of things. And I think that's important for people to know, because obviously, especially with the pandemic right now, people have, resources maybe that they don't have, that they had pre-pandemic. People have lost jobs. People are in tough positions. And so it's, don't feel that monetary is the only option you have, because you have your voice, you have your social media pages, you have your, whatever recommendations you can just give to friends and family. There are a lot of ways that you can support that don't necessarily have to be monetary based. And those are just as important, and I want to emphasize that those are worth their weight in gold. They are just as important as the monetary end of things. So don't ever, don't feel that monetary is the only option you have, because it is definitely not.
I have learned, now that I've got a couple books out, that the way that Amazon's algorithms work, for example, you need to have at least 60 5-star reviews of a book before the algorithms start to promote it as a recommendation when people look for similar books. So one of the things, when I first put my first book out, one of the things I really needed, yes, book sales are great. Please do that. But also, I've been asking people, call your local library and ask them to carry the book. Call the local bookstore, ask them to have it in the stores. Give a 5-star review on Amazon. These things take 30 seconds of your life, require no money at all, but they make a difference in promoting the message of a book. So when you're finding the books that you're reading by Black authors, by LGBT authors, books about Holocaust at a time where we have Nazism coming back in force, any of those times that you can promote it, you're also letting your community see what you stand for. And there's probably somebody of your friends who is Jewish and doesn't know where you stand. So seeing you say, this whole Nazi thing is garbage, and here's what I'm trying to do, I want you to know this is where I stand. Seeing these bills happen and hearing people on social media talk about, this is unacceptable, I'm calling my governor or my senator to be loud against any of these hateful bills, lets people know that you're a safe person to talk to. And I wish we had a million hours. Mariella, we're going to run out of time, even though we could hang forever. What else is coming through?
So we've got about 8 minutes left, and I just want to say thank you for highlighting that, there are several ways to, advocate for folks. And I do want to let folks know who might perchance take that the wrong way, that pay equity is real, and it's important that we approach it with, if you have the means, if you're hiring, pay equity is important. I was able to interview during our last summit 2 important women about empowering Black professionals through intersectionality, and they talked about how pay equity for Black women is so important. People are asking them to share their voice. without
Yeah, I was
wanting to either have a competitive salary. So it's, of
yes,
course, all
absolutely.
of these other things, but I want to make sure that folks who have the means know that that is one way you can definitely make it.
Ultimately, it's whatever you have the means to do is what you should do. Take everything that we've just said and put, to say that, because we're talking from, I'm talking from a place of just having gotten a full-time job. So, I was working part-time up until this point. But yeah, it says ultimately what you have the means to do is what you should do.
Yes. And I love the highlight also about language is important. Again, referencing this woman that I just interviewed from Kenya, one of the questions, the phrase was, it had third world country in it. And she invited everyone to not think of the global South. She actually said, think of the global South as the global South. Don't say third world countries, maybe say developing countries, but it always, if you're saying marginalized communities or minorities, it just kind of puts you in a box. And so, Kryss, I really love that you are, inviting folks to expand their language, and because otherwise you're always having to do the extra work to see how you can be this, as you said in the history books, this rich white
now with the difference
and able to make moves or not.
Yeah, we're seeing it with the difference now between what the word we always used was slave. We've used that in our history books in America for generations. Now we're reaching the point of being it's more common to hear it referred to as enslaved, and recognizing that there's a difference between saying that somebody was a slave is very different than saying someone was enslaved. We're seeing now, when we're talking about discrimination, when we're seeing about some of the sex trafficking stories in the news, that for a long time the language, and sometimes it still will talk about underage women. That's not a thing. They're underage girls. And when we're talking about what adult men are doing, it matters that we're referring to people as underage girls because they're children. And it also matters that when we're talking about adult women, in the workplace, and we're talking about colleagues or other people we know, that we're not calling them girls. We're not saying there's a girl I know at work. We're acknowledging these are adult people, they're women. We can't infantilize adult women because it takes away the power of who they are and of what they deserve. And, we could go on this for a million years too, but in our last 5 minutes, do we have final question?
What else do we have?
Yes, our last 5 minutes. So we've got a question from Melissa that I think it's nice to wrap up the conversation, just to put us in the time of the pandemic. So how do you continue your activism during the pandemic? How do you think the world will look after the pandemic in, I would say, underheard groups? She put marginalized groups, but I'm going to invite us to change our language.
Is a great
underheard groups.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I like that term.
Right. Some of that we've talked about, I think, in the use of social media. So that's definitely coming in more. I mean, I don't want to be that person, but also my next book that comes out next month is all about how to become more inclusive in professional settings. And so that's happening, and there are more and more books and conversations being had. So I think being really intentional about looking for opportunities to learn. One of the pieces that I always kind of find interesting is that we used to have this long commute period, right? Like it was really standard that we were all driving, however, or taking public transit for a set of minutes on the way in and a set of minutes on the way home. And now that we've all been working from home, we're gaining that time back. And because we're gaining that time back, even when we look at, I'm super busy and this is a whole other thing, and I don't have time to learn more stuff, and I'm exhausted, and all of that is definitely true and valid. Also, if you've picked up, I think the average commute in the US is 45 minutes each way. So we're looking at 90 minutes a day times 5 days a week. Also, I'm terrible at math. So whatever the number is on that, it's a lot of minutes. Even if you just committed yourself to, I will spend 5 minutes a day looking specifically for what's going on in the news related to a community I am not a part of, it automatically means that we become more knowledgeable. And so maybe that means that I read a story about Black women not being paid what they should be. And maybe as a white person, I didn't know about that. It's not about, should I have already known that? It may not even be about, do I have the power to change that? But now I become more knowledgeable. I am intentionally reading something written about Black women, which means when I'm clicking on things, the Google algorithm updates based on what people are looking at.
Yes.
It means that if you're looking at images, if you're being intentional, if you have to show, for example, an image of people, a generic image of people for your workplace, choose people that are inclusive, search for inclusive people. It'll move them up above the white people pictures. Doing those details and moments and sharing what you're learning with your friends, with your family, with your social media brings that in and isn't really taking any more of your time because you were giving up more than that in a commute you no longer have.
Yeah, and I was also going to say, I think going forward, we're going to see a lot of things that are more like more hybrid. So even when things come back in person, because the accessibility factor has been, being addressed pretty heavily with the pandemic, we don't want to see those accessibility factors go away once we start being able to be in person again. So my hope would be that people, businesses, academics, societies, et cetera, that you're going to take this accessibility factor that's been discovered during this period and make sure that that is still a part of whatever we do in person going forward, so that way the global access will always be there, even for people who can't physically be there. And that's a way you're going to be able to highlight voices who maybe can't physically travel to you, but then still have a say in the conversation and they still have a seat at the table.
Absolutely. And as we are coming back to some more of the conferences and events, when you're filling out information or when you get invited, another thing that takes no time and costs no money is to email whoever's inviting you and ask them outright. I'm just checking to see if you're being intentionally inclusive. Are you bringing in Black vendors? Are you making sure that the space that we're going to meet is supportive of the trans community? It may mean that they
or the city that we're meeting in is inclusive.
So now we're looking at, is our industry giving our money for these events to cities that have horrible laws and bills coming up? And can we be intentional about not doing that? Can we be intentional that the bathrooms in these facilities, some of them have signs that talk about inclusive restroom policies, where the code of conduct to attend to these events includes conversations or language about people get to use the bathroom that best fits their identity? Are we putting things in here about, do we only have maybe the wait staff who serves us happens to be all Black people and the person in charge is a white man? That's a problem. Are they not looking at all at who the vendors are that they're choosing, but they could? That's something that, and when people know that it matters,
it's intentionality.
Yes. And
it's intentionality.
People are hearing this not because the Black people are asking about the Black people and the gay people are asking about the gay people, but when the non-Black people are asking about inclusion for Black people, it feels different. It comes in differently because it indicates it isn't just count the number of Black people at the company. That's how many people will care about inclusion. No, we all care about inclusion. And our white faces care as much about inclusion as non-white faces. And you don't get to decide only 20% of our company fits this demographic. That's not enough for us to care. We're going to keep speaking out, not just on behalf of one another, but alongside one another, so that no one's doing the work on their own.
Yeah, and I think it's support and intentionality.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
what I would
support
say.
It's intentionality. Absolutely. So let's leave this conversation that's been so thoughtful. I think both of you, we're just a little over time, but I just want to encourage people to be intentional, right? Yes. So I love take that extra step. Be intentional.
Use social media.
Yes.
Mariella, what's your website again, so we can go find out about what you're doing?
That's beautiful. It's thepositiveforceteam.org, thepositiveforceteam.org. And I just want to again say thank you to PowerToFly. Thank you, Kryss. Thank you, Karen. And this has been an amazing chat. Thank you for the folks who have written in the chat box. And we'll pass the mic back to Meg.